Alan di essere qua con noi, soprattutto perché per lui, poverino, sono le 6 del mattino, quindi grazie Alan di essere qua con noi anche con questa alzata all'alba. Allora, abbiamo il piacere e l'onore.
That's quite okay, lovely to be here.
Dicevo, un po' di storia breve, brevissima del coaching ontologico e anche di chi è Alan in questo caso. Voi sapete che per chi ha fatto la nostra scuola e per chi invece non ci ha mai ascoltato, cioè non conosce la nostra scuola, soprattutto l'origine, no, di questo coaching ontologico. Il coaching ontologico nasce molti anni fa, un po' dalla teoria di Umberto Maturana, del costruttivismo di Umberto Maturana, di quegli studi che lui fa sul linguaggio e su come comunicare attraverso la soggettività, no, del pensiero. E subito dopo questo viene preso e trasferito negli Stati Uniti da 3 personaggi molto importanti per noi. Uno è Fernando Flores, l'altro è Raffaele Echeverría e l'altro ancora è Julio Laya. Fernando Flores è il primo che fa un pensiero di come comunicare perché ci sia davvero un'intenzione comunicativa e che arrivi all'interlocutore un messaggio che è più o meno quello che è la mia intenzione di comunicare, no? Quindi lui ha fatto una serie di studi anche attraverso la sua esperienza politica, perché lui è stato anche in prigione quando era in Cile, poi emigrando negli Stati Uniti ha fatto questa riflessione e ha detto: noi non abbiamo saputo comunicare con il nostro popolo quali erano le nostre intenzioni e il popolo nostro si è spaventato molto. E a questo punto poi ha incominciato a studiare insieme ad altri 2 cileni che sono Julio Laya e Raffaele Echeverría per capire come usare questo linguaggio perché abbia il potere di trasmettere le nostre intenzioni, la nostra verità, la chiama lui, e ottenere così risultati, buone relazioni e quel coordinamento di azioni che tanto cerchiamo noi coach. Come dicevo subito dopo, Raffaele Echeverría ha scritto il libro Ontologia del linguaggio, che tutti i nostri allievi conoscono, e insieme a Julio Laya ha fondato Newfield, di cui credo Alan sia anche un franchisor, non so se si può dire così. Quindi lui rappresenta Newfield in Australia, credo sia già da molti anni che ha sviluppato, no, questa teoria ontologica, questo modo di essere, no, questo adesso qui ci racconterà un po' di più, che dal mio punto di vista è anche un altro punto di vista di questo nuovo, di questo coaching ontologico che noi tanto insegniamo nella nostra scuola. Lui si occuperà oggi anche di andare un po' più in profondità e capire in qualche modo come il corpo e la saggezza del corpo ci possono aiutare a essere ancora più ontologici. E basta, adesso lascio la parola ad Alan, lui si presenterà e dirà anche che cosa farà oggi e poi ci vedremo poi alla fine del suo webinar. Grazie a tutti, a dopo.
Thank you, and good evening, everybody. It's really lovely to be here, and thank you very much for the opportunity. I want to introduce you to the ontological approach to coaching, as I understand it, and I'll be using a few slides to do that. So ontological coaching and wanting to introduce you to what I call the wisdom of the body. And so what we'll do is I'll give you an overview of the ontological approach, and then I'll introduce what we call the domain of the body, and why that matters as part of learning and change. And then I'd like to invite you to participate in coaching yourself in the body. I'll provide you with some guidances to do that and some specifics. because I found that the best way to learn about this approach is to actually experience it directly. So hopefully that will be a worthwhile experience for you. And then at the end, if we've got time, we could take some questions, and I'll just tell you about some further resources if you'd like to explore a little further. So starting off with the word ontology, because it's not a very common word, I think, in whatever language it's spoken in. And if you go to a dictionary, at least in English, what you'll find is that ontology is either referred to as the study of being or the study of existence. And of course, we're particularly interested in the nature of human existence. And essentially, it's an approach to looking at what is it to be a human being. And originally, this was seen to be sort of something that people in universities explored in philosophy departments, but I think it's become a much more important issue today in the sort of world we're living in. What is to be human, and how is it to function well? So in ontological coaching, we talk about coaching to way of being, and we regard way of being as the underlying driver, behaviour and communication. So I'm going to explain all this about way of being in some detail. And so to give a broad picture, if we start at the top of this diagram, we've got the expression quality of existence. This is what all of us desire, what we might call a good life, where we've got not only a good life materially and financially, but also good relationships, good family life, good social life, a workplace that we enjoy to go to every day that's stimulating, we learn, we've got good relationships there. And the results we do and don't get in life influence the quality of our existence, and coming out to either side of results is performance and productivity, which relates, of course, to organisations. So the quality of this existence of an organisation is very much bound up with the performance and productivity of the people working there. And underpinning that are the relationships and conversations we have with people, or our behaviour and communication. These play a very important role in the results we do and don't get. And when we look at this area, this is often the focus of change. How can we communicate better? How can we improve our behaviour to get better results? And so we didn't go as well as we wanted, and then we might reflect on our behaviour and say, yes, I needed to do that differently. Let's say you were chairing a meeting. It didn't go as well as you liked. And you realise, look, there was something about your behaviour in the meeting that contributed to that. Maybe you didn't wait long enough to let someone talk something through, or perhaps you were impatient with people and your tone of voice was a bit too sharp. And so reflecting on our behaviour and changing our behaviour is something we call first order learning. It's a very important part of learning, and this is where we learn new techniques and skills. People talk about getting new tools, and so this is first order learning. In the ontological approach, we consider that may not be sufficient because it could leave out something else that's happening as part of being a human being, and that's what's happening within us. And this is what we call our way of being. This is where our perceptions and attitudes live. And this is, of course, of what I've said, the focus of what we're doing in the ontological approach. And what we found, if our way of being isn't aligned with a new tool or a technique, we actually don't get to apply the tool or technique. We might use it for a while, but then we don't. It's not applicable for us. So we consider there's a deeper order of learning for us to engage in, what we call second order learning. And this is where we reflect on our way of being. So if, for example, I was chairing a meeting and it didn't go as well as I liked, what I could reflect on is what was happening to me emotionally in the meeting that had my voice be sharp and me be impatient, or to not let someone speak for longer. Perhaps there was something about how I was breathing, or some part of how I was in my physiology, or perhaps I had a whole lot of other thoughts happening before I got into the meeting that distracted me. So these are all parts of way of being. And this is the focus of ontological coaching. And as I said, this is where our perceptions and our attitudes live. many of which are deep-seated and out of awareness. So let's take a closer look at this notion of way of being. What is it? What does it consist of? And the interpretation, this is the basic ontological coaching model, is that to be human is that we function at the same time in three spheres or domains of existence: language, moods and emotions, and body. And these are going on all the time. So language includes our thoughts, what we write and what we speak. And the power of language is that it is not a thing, it is a process. It's a process we are immersed in all the time. And the power of this process is that continually generates reality. So in the ontological approach, we have a diverse ways of working with language, ways of listening for a client to try and discern how is their language working for them or not working for them? How is it trapping them in ways that they can't move forward without them being aware of it? The second sphere or domain, moods and emotions, very powerful. We are emotional beings. There's no avoiding that. Emotions are an integral part of the functioning of our nervous system, which includes the brain. And the power of moods and emotions is they continually shape our perceptions and behaviour. And we have this expression to try and cover that. It's called predispositions for action. Excuse me. Our moods and emotions always predispose us or orient us towards certain perceptions and behaviour. So being able to work with clients in this area is really crucial. And finally, we have the area of the body, if you like, our entire physiology. And this has been paid very little attention to in many approaches to trying to help people improve. And the essence of the body, what we focus on, is things like posture. How is the way the person holds their body influencing the way they're perceiving the world and influencing language and emotions? Their muscle tension, their breathing. And these are things we're going to explore in some detail in a little while. But the essence of the body is it's the embodiment in our body of who we think we are, like our self-identity and what's possible for us in life. One philosopher of the body wrote, he said, we live in a body of possibility. And sometimes we can get trapped in living in a body of no possibility without realising it. But the bottom line with this notion of way of being is that we say the world shows up to us according to our way of being. In other words, the world that we know is the world we know from our way of being. And sometimes that's a restrictive world. And ontological coaching, what we're wanting to do is to help people change their way of being so that a different world shows up to them, a different world of possibility, of engagement and action. This diagram just as an illustration of first order and second order learning. So if we just go like, it's interesting that we cannot change things in life we do not notice. And ontological noticing is observing the specifics of our way of being and how they shape our perceptions and behaviour. So how do we help people make shifts so ultimately they can take more effective action? So when we get a result, we reflect on our action or behaviour, that's first order learning. When we get an outcome or a result, and we reflect on how is my way of being contributing to that outcome, we're engaging in second order learning. So I hope that's made the overall approach sufficiently clear for you in our basic model. Let's move on now. I just want to close this section giving you an overview of the ontological coaching with a couple of quotes. One from Peter Senge, who you might have heard of. He's quite a renowned organisational consultant. Real learning gets to the heart of what it means to be human. Through learning, we recreate ourselves. I think that speaks so beautifully to the ontological approach. And then a longer quote. It gives me great pleasure to be allowed to play host to you. You know, of course, where this other world lies. The world you are seeking is that of your own soul. It gives me great pleasure to be allowed to play host to you. You know, of course, where this other world lies hidden. This world you are seeking is that of your own soul, and that the different reality you are longing for is only to be found deep in yourself. I can give you nothing that does not already exist in you. All I can give you is the opportunity, the stimulus, the key. I'm going to help you make your own world visible. That is all. I think this is such an important quote to get to the heart of ontological coaching. We want to help people discover what's already within them. That's where the source of deep change lies. And I'm hoping you'll get to experience this in a little while when we get engaged in the body coaching. Let's move on now and look in detail at one of these domains, what we call these existential domains of language, emotions, and body, and take a look at the domain of language. So I want to give you a rationale for why the body is so important. First of all, we regard it as the slowest and yet the most profound domain for change. The effect it can have can be long-lasting, quite deep-seated. Why is this? All learning and change happens in the nervous system. And the nervous system is right throughout our body, not just the brain. And so if the nervous system is where learning and change happens, to ignore the body is to unintentionally deny clients the opportunity for change. Now, most approaches to change seem to focus a lot on language, some in the area of emotions as well, but very few seem to recognise the importance of the body. Now, one important part of the body, and this comes out of traditional Chinese medicine, as well as more recent developments in the Western approaches to the body, is an area called the fascia. And this is the connective tissue of the body. It's this very thin web-like substance that actually holds the body up, holds it in place. And this contains neurons. The neurons being nerve cells, part of the nerve system. The nervous system is throughout this really crucial part of the body called the fascia. And as I mentioned earlier, that when we talk about the body in the ontological approach, we're looking at how does someone hold themselves posturally? Are their shoulders aligned? Is their neck upright? How is their pelvis positioned? This is all part of posture. The muscle tension we carry, and that's how a lot of emotions and moods are held in the body. And the way we breathe. We've all developed a habitual way of breathing that quite subtly may be limiting us. And I think that we are meant as a species to be what I called spontaneously upright and fluid and fluent in our movements. If you watch young children grow up, they don't grow up with frowns on their forehead, unless, unfortunately, they've been abused. They don't grow up being tense in the shoulders, restricted in their movements. They just move as humans are meant to move. And then what seems to happen is through the many experiences we have in life, sometimes we take on perspectives without realising that become part of our body that limit us. So one practitioner of the body developed this term called insults to form. This compromise, how we hold ourselves in the body. So we might have learnt to hold ourselves tight because of an experience we had in school, or maybe a parent or a relative said something to us that they didn't realise was hurtful, but we took it on as hurtful. And so we developed a habitual way of holding ourselves in the body that we didn't realise, and we can carry with us all the way through to adulthood. So that's an overall of why does the body matter? It's such a significant area of learning and change, as I said earlier, that can really enable deep change, sustained change to occur. So let's now move into specifics of the body, and I'm going to ask you to stand up if you can do this, please, because we find that standing up's probably the best way to start to get connection with your body. And what I'll be doing is I'll take you through different parts of the body to help you develop awareness. And I'll offer you some thoughts about some small shifts you can make, and just for you to make some little experiments with that. So this is just starting to get familiar with what we call our basic somatic framework. So soma is the Greek word for the body, hence the word somatic. So if you're comfortably standing, what I'd like you to do is, first of all, just be aware of your feet and notice how they seem connected to the ground or the floor. And the distribution of weight on your feet. Is your weight a little bit forward? Is it a little bit back? Is it a little bit more on the insides or the outsides of your feet? And whatever you're aware of will be fine. Several clients I've worked with over the years were having difficulty in conversations. They were saying, they were being overwhelmed by other people in conversations, not able to find their voice, not able to hold their ground. And when we work with the body, each time the person's weight was more towards the back of their feet. And they were off balance in their physiology, but that led to them being off balance in their conversations. So we worked on them getting grounded. And one way to do that, and with the body, it's often being creative and using your imagination, being creative using images, is if you could imagine there are little tree roots coming out from the bottom of your feet connected into the ground that give you a really solid connection. And also if you can be in touch with where you are standing right now, that is your legitimate place in the world. Nobody else is entitled to that place. That is yours. And so you can feel solid in holding that space, that ground for yourself. From the feet, we can move to the knees. And I want to invite you to notice, how are you holding your knees, which might sound a bit strange, but are they locked? Or are they braced? Are they tight? Or are they relaxed? What happens when you relax your knees? You loosen them a bit. Almost as if you're just sinking into soft knees. What do you notice happens there? Does anything happen with your breathing when you relax your knees? If we move to the pelvis, and with it we move with all our body, but the pelvis is often a part, quite subtly, we move from first. And ideally, this is positioned under the shoulders. It's aligned with the positioning of our shoulders. Now, one thing you can do is place your fists just at the base of your spine or on the top of your buttocks and gently push forward. And that might seem a little strange, but it might align your pelvis a little bit more under your shoulders. One thing that's easy for us to do is to actually unintentionally have pushed our pelvis back a little bit. This is often a way that our body is in a sort of a subtle defensive position. It's often associated with a mood of anxiety. And this tends to affect the upper body and breathing. So just be conscious of, do you need to just gently move your pelvis forward? With your lower back. What can be helpful here is to imagine that it's like jelly. It's firm and pliable, so jelly as a dessert. Sorry, I don't know the Italian word. But it's firm, but it's pliable, it's flexible. It can move. The lower back is a part of our body where it's so easy to hold a lot of tension and we become stiff and inflexible. And then there's the torso, going from the stomach all the way to the chest. And there's a few little imaginary things that can be done here. One is, first of all, if we go and we include the shoulders with this, if you imagine that your neck and your shoulders are a coat hanger, and that your shoulders are just hanging nice and loose, hanging down like we see a coat hanger in a wardrobe, and so drape across it. And then if we go to the upper chest area, what can be helpful here is to imagine a golden thread attached to the top of your sternum, and it goes up high into the sky, and that thread gently lifts up, and it uplifts your torso. Your rib cage comes up just a little bit, and your shoulders are hanging nice and loose at the same time. And then another thing we can imagine doing is just gently expanding across the top of the chest. Not sort of sticking the chest forward, but thinking about it expanding laterally, which just tends to sort of open out the chest, and the shoulders spontaneously move back. So rather than think of moving the shoulders back, think about expanding across the top of the chest. And we go to the shoulders and the shoulder blades. I've mentioned the coat hanger. What I've got there is shoulder blade support. Imagine someone is standing behind you and loosely cupping their hands on your shoulder blades, giving them beautiful support. So you don't need to hold any tension in that area of your body anymore. You can just let your shoulder blades go, and you can let them fall into the hands of this person who's supporting you. And then we move to the position of the neck and the head. As you head forward, is it more back? Does your head point down? Does your chin come down? Does your chin come up, which will reposition the head? Ideally, if we look at the back of the neck, it's straight. It comes off the spinal cord, and without being rigid, it's just held comfortably upright. And another imaginary thing we can do here is to imagine your head is a balloon floating on top of your spine with your chin parallel to the ground. It's important not to forget our arms and hands and fingers. These are hanging loose by our side, fingers pointing to the ground, coming down from that coat hanger with the shoulders hanging loose. And finally, the facial muscles. This is an area where it's very easy to carry tension, and often where we detect tension and emotions in other people. So just to notice with your forehead, muscles of the forehead, is there any way you could just allow them to relax a little more? The muscles either side of your eyes. Your jaw muscles, upper and lower jaw. Muscles of the cheekbones. And the muscles around the mouth. These are all areas where we can release tension. There are apparently about 110 muscles in the face. And one thing you can experiment with is to just place the tip of your tongue behind your top front teeth and to breathe through the nose. And this is a way that you can begin to release tension from the jaw and other parts of the face. And it might just be 1 or 2 moments of doing that every now and then. And so we've all learned habitual ways to hold our body. And looking at these different parts of the body, as I say, it's in English, it's not rocket science. It's not overly complicated. But what we haven't been supported to do is to pay attention to the specifics of how we hold our body. What is our habitual posture? And what's the possibility for us to make some small shifts? And I emphasize small shifts in the body. Maybe the knees get more relaxed. The pelvis slightly changes position. You alter the position of your chin. These can bring quite significant change in people's perception of themselves. They can move to not feeling worthy or legitimate, doubting themselves because they've got a body of self-doubt, to realizing they don't have to doubt themselves so much from a different body. as I said earlier, the body's the slowest but the most profound to change. And often in working with clients in coaching, it is important to give them some practices to do afterwards, some things to make sure they continually work with, so that any changes in the body get consolidated. So let's move on. I'd like to move into you experiencing some body coaching. So first up, what I'd like you to do is to identify an issue you'd like to explore. Sorry, I forgot to say, if you can sit down for a moment now while we go through this. I'd like you to think of some area of your life that you'd like to be going better. And I'll go through the phases of the exercise, and then we'll do them step by step. So first of all, it's important to tune in with what you're saying to yourself about the issue. What's your self-talk, your internal dialogue? And you'll have time to do that. And then I'll ask you to notice the specifics of how you are in your body, what we've just worked through. When you're talking to yourself this way, what do you notice about your feet, knees, pelvis, etc.? Then I'm going to ask you to shake it off, to wiggle and move all parts of your body and breathe deeper. And then I'm going to ask you to make some experiments, to make some small shift in different parts of the body. What parts of the body would you like to hold a little differently? What would you like to change about your feet, your knees, your pelvis, etc.? So I'll take you through that so that you will basically have moved to a different way of being in the body. And then settling into that, to think about the issue and to see what difference does it make in terms of how you see this issue. Think about the issue from a different body. So moving this into more diagrammatic phase, let's start this experiment of self-coaching using the body. So first of all, if you haven't already, if you could identify the issue you'd like to explore, something you'd like to be going better in your life. And then if we move over to the left-hand side, the green bubble, take a few moments, tune into what are you saying to yourself about this issue. What's the conversation? Just take a moment to get in touch with that. And now, saying that to yourself, I'd like you now to notice how you are in specifics of your body. So what do you notice about your feet? How do your feet feel and how are they positioned when you're in this mode of saying things to yourself about this issue? What do you notice about your knees? How is your pelvis positioned? What do you notice about your torso, maybe your stomach? And through to the chest, your lower, middle, and upper chest. What sort of tension is there? How have you positioned your chest? Is it closed? Is it more open? Is it tight? What do you notice about the way you're holding your shoulders? And your shoulder blades? What are you aware of in your arms and hands and fingers? And then if you notice, how are you with your neck and head? How have you positioned your neck? Is there tension there? Does your neck seem to be forward? Is it upright? What about the position of your chin? And your facial muscles? What do you notice about your forehead? The muscles around the eyes? Your jaw muscles? Muscles of the cheekbone? And muscles around your mouth? And also, notice your breathing. How are you breathing? Are you breathing in through your nostrils or your mouth or both? What's the rate of your breathing? How quickly are you breathing in? How deep does each breath go into your body? And how are you breathing out? Through the nostrils or the mouth? And how long does your out-breath take? Okay, so let's do some shaking off with that. And I've got a piece of music here, hopefully to help us.
'Cause the players gonna play, and the haters gonna hate, baby. I'm just gonna shake. Shake it off. Heartbreakers gonna break, and the fakers gonna fake, baby. I'm just gonna shake. I shake it off. I never miss a beat.
Hopefully you've shaken that off. Okay, so let's go back and let's do some experimenting with different areas of the body, making some shifts, making small shifts. So if you were to change something about how you are positioning your feet, would it be your weight distribution? Would you use the imagination of those tree roots to have you more grounded? What's generally recommended is our weight is just slightly forward on the balls of our feet. Seems to have us being appropriately alert without being too tense. What about your knees? Would you change your knees? Would you soften your knees? Would you flex them? Would you make them a little tighter? If we move to the pelvis, and you use your fist just at the base of your spine or the top of your buttocks, what difference does that make if you just slightly reposition your pelvis? Or if you experiment with what we looked at with the chest, first of all, starting with the shoulders, allowing your shoulders to be the sides of a coat hanger hanging loose, and then having that golden thread attached to your sternum, which is gently elevating your torso with your shoulders still hanging loose. Or if you imagined your muscles and other parts of your tissue just releasing and expanding across the top of the chest. If you imagine that someone's standing behind you, cupping your shoulder blades so that they are supported. You don't need to hold any tension there. And if your head is a balloon floating on top of your spine, with your chin still parallel to the floor, And you might like to notice in all that we've done so far, what happens to your breathing? Are you able to breathe a little more the way that you want to? And how about if you focus on the muscles of your face and forehead? What could you release there? What could you relax? What could have you be a little bit more the way you want to be in the body? And finally, with your arms and hands and fingers, what small shifts would you want to make there? One expression from a renowned body worker, a person by the name of Moshe Feldenkrais. He would ask, what could be easier? What could be softer? Often we've learnt to be in our body in a way that seems it's an excess of effort. We're straining all the time without knowing it, rather than just being in a body that allows us to be spontaneously fluid and at ease. So as you continue to breathe, if you can stay with these small shifts in the body, allow them to settle into you. And from this way of being in the body, to think about this issue. And be mindful as you think about the issue, your body doesn't shift back to how it was previously, that you maintain the different way of being in the body. And what do you notice about how you think and what could be possible with this issue? Are there possibilities being revealed to you that you were not aware of before? What would it be like for you to live much more from this different way of being in the body? And a very important question I've found to ask people when they have experienced shifts in the body, and it is positive for them and they like it, is to check if this will actually remain, and ask them, and I'll ask you, do you fully and genuinely give yourself permission from this day on to live more from this way of being in your body? And ideally, the answer will be a very strong yes. And sometimes that doesn't happen. Sometimes there's a yes, or sometimes there could be, I don't know, sounds like a good idea. So there's hesitation and there's doubt. This is associated with a mood we call resignation. Resignation, and all moods and emotions live in the body. Resignation is a mood that denies possibility. So when you experience a shift in the body, and it's a much better place to live from in dealing with not only this issue, but perhaps other issues, resignation will deny that. People say, oh, that's all very well, but when you get out in the real world, it's not going to last. So this is something that's very important to be mindful of and to be committed to practice staying in this body. And if this is a body that works for you, I have a few suggestions. to how you could practice and consolidate this way of being in the body. First of all, just to be in front of a mirror and to be in a body that wasn't so helpful. Perhaps you were experiencing more tension than you wanted to, and the way you positioned different aspects of your body wasn't helpful. Then take a step to the left or the right and make the small shifts from your feet through your knees and pelvis, and get into that different way of being in the body that you know is better for you. And notice how you look. And do the same videoing yourself. Turn the video function on your phone and notice, or get someone to take photos of you in each different way of being in the body. That can give you some good feedback. And then another practice is to go walking, and walk in what we call the old, unhelpful, unresourceful body, and then make shifts and walk in the more resourceful body, the more helpful body. So hopefully that's been an interesting experiment for you, an interesting exploration. And if you can just stay with that with those shifts you've made in the body, and just finally to notice your breathing. What way of breathing is best going to suit you? That will complement a different way of being in the body. And breathing is extraordinarily important because it affects our emotions and it affects us mentally. And the way we hold our body affects the way we breathe. Now, when you start to change your breathing, you can also change how you are in the body. So it's a two-way process. All right. Thanks for joining the experiment. If you'd like to sit down again, details of the essence of this approach to coaching. Now, what we cover in some overall considerations that are important all the time in coaching, ways we work with language, how we listen to people, how we work with people in language to help them shift their reality, the ways we work with moods and emotions, which are very closely aligned with the body, and of course the body. And finally, a very important biological consideration. Humans, we're living systems like many other living systems on the planet. What we know biologically is that nothing can directly change how we are in our perceptions and behaviour. When we coach someone, it's not a direct cause and effect because the nervous system doesn't have connection with the world around. The nervous system is where learning and change happens. All we can do is what's called respectfully and constructively perturb someone's overall biology or bodyhood. And from that, they may trigger a change in their own nervous system. And our task is to be as skillful and respectful as we can be, helping the client finding a way to shift themselves. And finally, if you're interested in exploring a little further, I have a website, the Ontological Coaching Institute website. There's a link there directly into articles. There's probably more than 60 of these. I'll be bringing another newsletter out next week with an article that I'm calling Breathing and Emotional Transition. So you're welcome. They are resources for you to download. If you want to use with clients, you're most welcome to do that. And then I've put together 4 books. The overall title of each book is Coaching to the Human Soul. The purple book is a focus on language. The orange cover is a focus on moods and emotions. The green cover is the biological basis of ontological coaching and how to coach to the body. And the yellow cover is an in-depth bringing together of those first 3 volumes in a very practical manner that I've called Towards Professional Artistry with Ontological Coaching. So I think we've got a few moments for questions. If anybody's, I'm not sure how we would organise this, but if anybody's got any questions I could briefly respond to, I'd be more than happy to do that.
Le domande sono organizzate in modo che voi potete chattare e noi poi le leggiamo ad Alan. Prima domanda, i libri sono tradotti? Rispondo io no, sono in inglese.
Which one of them is the resume of the others? Each book builds on the one beforehand. If you read the fourth volume, you really would need to have the background of the previous 3 volumes.
This is Elizabeth speaking. And I'm a great fan of yours. I have read and reread and studied the first 3 books, and I'm so excited that the 4th one is coming out. Having done ontological coaching in Italian first, which is not my my native language, I'm Austrian, it was hugely important to also read your books and learn from you from the English concepts. With the somatic coaching, so thank you for this exercise. Now, I noticed for myself that the new body felt really weird, which is to be expected because it's not my habitual way of being. So for me, the question, if you'd asked me the question, does it feel helpful or full of possibilities? My initial response would have been, no, it feels just weird. I feel like a duck with my bum sticking out, because that's how it felt, because I felt the tension in my bum. And in order to release it, my kind of pelvis moved back. So how do you, if you have a client like me, how do you then work with that client or continue to work with that client?
Yeah, it's a very good question. Sometimes people say it doesn't feel natural. And I think what feels natural is what's become habitual. And we've spent years and years learning to be a certain way in the body. So to emphasize, just make small shifts at a time. So, if a certain way of holding the pelvis feels really weird and uncomfortable, well, what would be just a small way of slightly repositioning the pelvis? When you get comfortable with that, then how could you take that a little bit further? Because I think your point's a really good one. Because sometimes when we shift the body, it feels like a huge shift. It's often like, not too many millimeters at all, but it feels big for us. So sometimes we say to people, what's the smallest possible change you'd be comfortable to make? That seems to be a way that people can gradually go about that. Thanks, Elizabeth. Which is the first of your books you suggest to read? I would start with the purple book. It's an overview of the ontological approach. You could start with any of the first 3 books. They do build on the other ones, but I think if you wanted to start with the green book on the body, which is the second part of it, you could do that. Do you mind mindful useful too? Look, it can be. It depends what you're paying attention to. If you are meditating, obviously the body can go into a relaxing mode, but we might often only do that when we meditate, and when we go back to normal life, we go back to a habitual body. So I'd say if you can meditate and focus on the body, yes. I'll be being a cricketer. No. Look, when I was playing cricket and I also played baseball, I just was amazingly unaware of my body, as I think a lot of sports people are. It's probably better today than when I played. It would have been really handy to have had this knowledge when I played cricket. I'm just going to the English ones. The body is impacted by adrenaline in stress situations. Yes, with adrenaline overload, I think breathing plays an important role. And sometimes we try and breathe in too much air when we're stressed. So I found it important just to take little breaths in and to make it frequent, not in a stressed way of breathing, but gradually slowing down the breathing. So you actually start with the pace at which you're breathing when you're stressed, focus on taking in air and just gradually slowing down.
C'è qualcuno che chiede un caso di successo di un lavoro con un coach, no? Che è stato, dove è stato fatto proprio un lavoro sul corpo che più ti sia piaciuto, Alan.
Yeah. Yes, yeah. I think if I go back to an instance I mentioned of the positioning of the feet, this was a person in a bank, like one of the major banks in Australia, and he was in the risk management area. So risk management is sometimes they're called the killjoys. They kill the joy for people who are trying to break new ground in the business. And risk management are taking care, making sure the bank's following all regulations and won't put itself at what they call reputational risk, you know, that people won't do silly things that damage the reputation of the bank. So that was his job. And he was getting a lot of negative criticism from senior executives. You know, they felt he was always in the way, throwing up barriers. And he knew his job. And he knew if he didn't do his job, you know, it would not be good in the long run for the bank. But he was very stressed because these were senior people. He carried a lot of weight and authority in the bank. And he just didn't know how to respond to them. And his weight, as I said, was on the back of his feet. I showed him a linguistic process whereby he could use a series of steps to engage the executives in a different conversation. Now, let's say that's a tool or a technique that could be really useful. But if his body wasn't a certain way, he wouldn't be able to use that technique in the conversation. He'd be overwhelmed again. So we worked on his body and we worked on him being grounded, and we worked on all these other parts of the body, his pelvis, position of his chest. I got him in touch with his legitimacy and worthiness in his role in the bank. And we went through a number of rehearsals. I played the role of the negative executive, criticising him, and how he could start to get in touch with having conversations from a different way of being in the body, and how he could use this linguistic process. And it took us a couple of sessions and probably about 10 rehearsals, but eventually he got it solidly in the body. And when I checked up with him later on, about a month later on, how it was going, he said, you know, not perfect, but he said much, much better. He said, I'm much less stressed. And he said, I'm actually finding I'm getting less criticism from the executives because they cannot answer the questions I ask them. They cannot justify some of the opinions they're expressing to me. And he said he didn't tell me in the coaching, but he said he had a 12-month-old baby that wasn't sleeping well, and he was stressed, and so home life had become a bit more tense in his relationship with his wife. And he said, this has made such a huge difference to me in home life. He said, I'm feeling so much more at ease, enjoying the experience of our child more. So it was a good example of he could experience the shift, and that was really good, but it did need to be consolidated. And I did give him, some things to practice continually, which I think he was very good at doing.
Come si fa a lavorare con il corpo con la distanza, adesso che abbiamo il distanziamento sociale e che siamo in piena pandemia, no? Questo lavoro sul corpo nel coaching online, come si utilizza?
Without wanting to be smart, very easily, actually. Look, you've just experienced me guiding you through something, and I couldn't see you. So hopefully that's been useful. But basically, you invite the client to stand up, or initially sitting perhaps, and just take them through being aware of their body as they're sitting. And then you can invite them to stand up. And what I suggest is you stand up with them. So you might have to reposition the screen so that you can see each other. And you won't be able to see all of their body clearly. But again, if you use this basic somatic framework, like I did tonight, you can guide the person through being aware of different parts of their body. And just check with them as you're going, what are they noticing? And the expression I had on one of the slides, We can't change what we don't notice. So a big part of this approach to coaching is wanting to bring things to people's attention that's part of their being, but they're not aware of. And once they're aware of it, they can then be in a position to explore making small shifts and see what those effects are. So, you know, I mean, the availability of a camera is just fantastic for doing body coaching. Well, I want to thank you for participating. It's been a really lovely experience. I haven't been able to see you all, of course. I'm coming up to breakfast time here, so it's been a lovely way for me to start the day. And thanks to everybody at EEC for the opportunity to participate in this. I hope it's been worthwhile for everybody.
Grazie Alan, avrai l'opportunità, spero, anche di approfondire questi argomenti. Io sono qua per raccontarvi anche che cosa faremo in successivo, se voi avrete il piacere di sentire ancora Alan. Stiamo proponendo un percorso insieme a lui, anzi lui lo sta proponendo attraverso di noi, di 4 giornate. Adesso vi faccio vedere, io ho qualcosa anche da condividervi, così lo faccio velocemente. Eccola qua. Allora, l'idea è quella di, per chi vuole, di approfondire questi argomenti del corpo e come si lavora anche sia a distanza che nelle sessioni di coaching individuale dal vivo, che speriamo che si possano fare al più presto, se poi riusciremo a vaccinarci tutti. Allora, abbiamo previsto un primo corso che sarà online, perché poi Alan sarà sempre lì in Australia. Questi saranno di mattino, non a quest'ora qua, quindi riusciamo anche all'epoca della Pasqua ad avere delle distanze meno ampie per quanto riguarda il fuso orario. Quindi il 7, il 14, il 21 e il 28 tendenzialmente in mattinata, adesso dobbiamo ancora capire bene gli orari, farà Alan un percorso di approfondimento sulla saggezza del corpo. Sono 4 incontri di 4 ore e mezza ciascuno, 4 ore e mezza perché c'è una pausa di mezz'ora, anche perché ci sarà sempre Simona che ci accompagnerà. Stanno scrivendo anche ringraziandoti Simona per la splendida traduzione che hai fatto in simultaneo di Alan. Il corso sarà un corso CCE, perché oltre, io non l'ho detto, poi anche lui non si è presentato, ma lui è un coach PCC e tutti i suoi corsi, la maggior parte dei suoi corsi sono anche accreditati da ICF, quindi questo corso avrà la possibilità di ricevere 16 crediti formativi per il rinnovo delle credenziali. Acceso illimitato perché? Perché per lavorare su queste tematiche, anche questo noi oggi eravamo a un certo punto eravamo in 188, adesso poi la gente ci sta lasciando, quindi siamo un po' meno, ma per lavorare su questa cosa qua noi abbiamo messo, e anche Alan ce l'ha chiesto, un limite di 12 persone per ciascun corso. Poi se ci saranno più iscritti ne lanceremo altri, quindi tanto vi manderemo comunque un sacco di comunicazioni attraverso Facebook e LinkedIn. E se ci permettete anche di mandarvi delle mail, adesso poi noi abbiamo le vostre mail visto che vi siete iscritti. E ho ancora un'altra cosa da dirvi, poi vi lascio, che insieme anche poi al lancio di questo corso di Alan, noi stiamo lanciando anche all'interno della nostra scuola una piattaforma che chiameremo ontologicamente, la mente ontologica, che è una cosa, un miscuglio tra quello che può essere la piattaforma per alunni, ma è anche aperta ad altre persone che sono interessate al coaching ontologico. La piattaforma ontologicamente prevederà anche tutta una serie di servizi, prossimamente a marzo ne uscirà, vi manderemo anche comunicazioni su questo, e lo dico adesso proprio per chi vorrà partecipare al corso di Alan: chi poi sarà iscritto alla piattaforma ontologicamente avrà degli sconti per il corso di Alan. Vi manderemo poi tutta una serie di informazioni per quanto riguarda anche i prezzi, e per adesso io vi mi interrompo e vi taccio perché così non vorrei poi rubare troppe ore alla vostra cena, perché noi qua siamo ora di cena, Alan. Tu sei in colazione, noi invece abbiamo utilizzato l'orario di cena, che è proprio molto importante per l'Italia, dalle 8 alle 9, e quindi tutti i nostri partecipanti sono stati molto contenti di saltare cena per ascoltarti.
Thank you once again. Goodbye everybody, enjoy the rest of your evening and good coaching.
Grazie Alan, grazie a tutti, buona cena e buon cucina a tutti, anch'io vi auguro. Ciao, grazie.